So, part 4. I got to Leicester Square and I jumped on the wrong train. So, London, it would have been the summer. It was summertime right after I didn't take that deal with Starbucks like an idiot. It was summertime 1992. And I was there I had a 3-month ticket, so I had to start looking for work. So that's what I did. My girlfriend went on a Kentucky tour, so I was left in a room full of people I didn't know, school teachers from Australia, Rick, Hippie, a bunch of them that I haven't spoken to in years, but I know that they follow me, so a big shout out. It was a really interesting time because coming from a small town, you tend to find that socially you knew everyone, so getting to know people and getting outside your comfort zone is quite, it's not a normal thing. And I decided that I was going to experience everything and talk to everybody, and that's what I did. So I got a job at an employment agency. We used to go there in the morning and then they would send you out on different jobs. I was a truck driver for a brewery for a couple of weeks. That was a really good job, but they kept asking for my truck license and I kept saying I'd lost my license and it was coming over from Australia. And so I lasted about 2 weeks before they said, if you can't bring in your license next couple of days, that we're going to have to let you go. And I had to quit because I didn't have a truck license. That would end that job, but it was a lot of fun. Got a job cleaning carpets. That was a really cool job. I got along great with the owner. She's a younger person, and I cleaned Dustin Hoffman's house. I cleaned some other earls and lords, and it was just a fascinating job. I was actually filling out the paperwork to be able to clean Buckingham Palace's carpets. So it was a fascinating job. And I was always playing pranks on the owner. And I said one weekend that I was going to break into Buckingham Palace to meet the Queen. And everything I generally said I did, and that's a theme through my whole life, is that weekend there was an Australian person, if you look back in the news, that broke into Buckingham Palace and sat on the end of the Queen's bed. And that was the weekend that I said it. And she really thought it was me, but it wasn't me. So, yeah, it was a lot of fun. I learnt a lot of things, and I talked to everyone, experienced everything from walking up the street. My buddy said, "Oh, Eric Clapton is standing next to you." I remember turning to this guy and I said the dumbest thing. I said, "You wouldn't happen to be Eric Clapton, would you?" And he said, "Yeah, I am." I said, "Oh, that's great. My buddy said that you play the guitar and you're pretty good at it." He goes, "Yeah, I do." And I said, "Well, that's great. I must know a song of yours, but just don't off the top of my head." That would have to be the biggest moronic thing that you could have said to Eric Clapton, but I didn't know. And I think that was the theme. I just, I had no fear. So London was a lot of fun. Had some really funny times working in a clothing factory, pulling off the plastic on clothes. And I looked at my buddy after 3 hours, and the line was as long as you could see of clothes in this clothes factory. I looked at him and said, "Let's get out of here. This is boring as shit." So we walked around there till we found where the cafeteria was, because in England, all those sorts of places have their own cafeterias. We got a free breakfast, and then off we went, never to be seen again. I got a job that the Prime Minister was supposed to be at. I was supposed to be a waiter at this job. Woke up incredibly late, a little bit hungover back in those days, won't lie to you. Had to go to the op shop to get some pants. I went with Hippie, and I swore that we got black, and I got a white shirt and black pants. I rolled up and she said they're blue pants. Huge argument, and they told me to leave because I had blue pants, which is fair enough. So England was a lot of fun. In between that, I had a friend over in Paris that asked me to come over there. And back then, you used to write letters. There was no mobile phones. So she wrote me a letter, gave me the directions. I wrote her back one and said, yeah, I'll come over and visit. I didn't understand that when you got on the boat in Dover and got off in Calais, that I was leaving England and going to France. And once I got off in France, that guess what? They spoke French. And I had dyslexia. So I thought that the instructions, I just couldn't read, but there was actually in French. So it was a double whammy for me. I had dyslexia and trying to read French. So I actually had to navigate into Paris and then get on the metro system just using a letter and get out to where she was living. And that in itself was really unique. And just even the exchange rate. I think I gave a little girl on the subway that was all dirty singing to me. I just gave her whatever change I had in my pocket, which turned out to be about 100 Australian dollars back at that time. And she sang to me for the next 40 minutes on that train because I got on the right train line, but I got on an express train and ended up halfway to Amsterdam and then had to turn around and come halfway back through France, which was another unique thing. First time I ever played Risk was in Paris, and I played it with two guys from the French Foreign Legion on the World Takeover. So it was a lot of interesting experiences in England, and in France. So I only stayed there a couple of weeks. I made my way back to England, stayed there a little bit longer, and my time was up in England. So I jumped on a plane and I headed back to the US and back to where I'd got my van, and I had a work permit to go and work up in Canada. So I drove my van up into Canada. I had the same issue. I remember sitting in the lineup heading into Canada, and I was reading about it in the Let's Go books. Remember, no internet. And it said you will pay significantly more for fuel up in Canada, and everything is half French and half English. And I just came from Paris. Like, I couldn't read French there, so I don't imagine I'm going to read it here. But that's how I learned about Canada, was in the lineup. And of course, my fuel tank was on empty when I got to the border, and it was more expensive when I got up into Canada. But that was the start of my Canadian journey. Is I got my visa filled out, and I had a 1-year work permit to work and live in Canada. I arrived up there in my camper van, which I think it was coming into fall at that time, and I stayed in a place called Burnaby at the RV park, and I ended up walking to a shopping centre the next day and started looking for work, and I got a job at Pizza Hut making pizzas, and to this day, it's still my favourite pizza. So I got a job there. It was a lot of fun, and that's where I met my wife at the time. She was the manager, and I worked at Pizza Hut, and I worked there for a couple of months until I got out of that job, got a better job in construction. I worked in different places, ended up going up to Whistler. I did a little bit of extra work because back then Vancouver was alive with TV shows. So I enrolled and I was just doing extra work, but on some pretty cool shows. 21 Jump Street with Johnny Depp, Street Justice. I was in a gang supposed to beat up Carl Weathers, which was Apollo Creed out of Rocky. Apparently, go figure, he doesn't like getting called Apollo Creed. And I did a Gillette commercial and a bunch of other things, and worked in Whistler, hitchhiked. Canada for that year was so great because it was so different from where I grew up in Central Queensland with the mountains and the snow and all the excitement. So I took full advantage of that year and I had an incredible time. But after a year, my visa was up and I had to come back to Australia. And that's what I did.